Can you tell how nervous I am? So I was really, really nervous a little while ago, and I was really considering like what my options were in my nerves, like thinking what would happen if I just like freaked out and didn't come out of the bathroom or something. Then God said, go and enter into worship. Go and experience and encounter me, and then I'll take care of everything else. And so I'm so thankful for our worship team that is willing to get up here every Sunday morning and bring in that spirit that we so desperately want to have here. I'm so thankful for their obedience, for them to just be up here, everything that it takes for them to get ready for a Sunday, and so that we can encounter God before anything else here gets started. It's such a good feeling. It's so reassuring, and it calms my nerves a lot. I'm not going to joke around. I did kind of consider what happened if I just stood over there and talked from way over there. But I'm here, so it's going to be a great Sunday. The weather is beautiful, and I'm so thankful for each and every person that's here today. So I need everybody to say, but first. That was lame. My 7-year-old and my 4-year-old did better. One more time. But first. Nice. And then. All right. So, but first and then. Those are two phrases that I've been saying for weeks now, and so I'm so excited that I get to share it with you, because maybe now I'll stop sharing it. I'll stop repeating it in my brain day after day. So, but first and then. How many of you here love when it's time to go on vacation and you can't wait for vacation to get here? But first, you have to work that long, long week, and then you get to go and enjoy vacation, right? It feels like that week is the longest 7 days of your entire life until you get to vacation. What about women? You can't wait to get in that smaller jean size, but first, you've got to make some choices, right, that are going to get you there, and then after those choices, you get to experience a new wardrobe. What about you can't wait for that promotion at work? Anybody? Promotions? It's going to be exciting, more money? Oh yeah. But first, you have to put in the work. You have to work hard. You have to research what your job is and what ways you can go further. And then maybe your boss will notice. Seniors, what about you can't wait for graduation? Really? That's really quiet. So you can't wait for graduation, but first you've got a full year full of senior activities that are going to be so fun that you'll think back to for the rest of your life, and it's really awesome. So then you get to experience graduation, and it's awesome. Okay, what about seniors? You can't wait till your parents stop bossing you around and telling you what to do. But first, you're going to have to get a job. You're going to have to pay for more than just your gas. You're going to need to be able to support yourself, and then just maybe, unless they're like my mom, then they might stop telling you what to do, but if you've got a mom like mine, there's just no chance. So all of this to say, but first one thing happens, and then something else happens, right? I love the Old Testament. A lot of things that I get to see happen in the Old Testament amaze me. The main reason why is because in the Old Testament, it is ordinary people in ordinary circumstances who, when they seek first, they will encounter an extraordinary God who will bring his love and his mercy into that circumstance, and it changes everything, not just for the person in the circumstance, but for anybody around them. So I find myself reading in the Old Testament because that can apply to us just as well today as it did when the Old Testament was being written. The story I'm going to talk to y'all about today, as I was researching and trying to find all of this stuff or whatever that I felt like God was saying, I was looking through different Bibles, and I noticed that 3 different Bibles from 3 different times had the same phrases underlined, circled, highlighted, and some crazy scribble notes all on the side. So even though I was hesitant at first to talk about it, once I realized that multiple times I'd come to the story for guidance, I decided that obviously God has something that I'm going to learn from this that he wants to share with me. And so what better way to share it with my family than to say, this is kind of what I'm learning. And I hope that God will speak to your heart the same ways that he is speaking to mine about your circumstances. So I'm reading out of 1 Kings 17. And this is a story about Elijah, who is another character that I love to read about just because he goes on some adventures all the time. So the first part of the story is that Elijah is at a brook that God had instructed him to go to. Now this is kind of weird to me because he's at a brook, God told him to go there, and God said, I'm going to provide for you while you're at the brook. So the weird part is that God is using ravens to bring him food. And I just find that so strange. But at the same time, I find it so comforting because it doesn't matter what method he's going to use. It's a promise to you that he will always provide when he says that he's going to. So Elijah is at this brook, and I guess life is pretty great because he's at a brook. He doesn't have anything to do except hear from the Lord. He is brought food by the ravens. He's got water by the brook, and that sounds pretty good. Room service, Old Testament style, sounds pretty great. But then all of a sudden, God tells him, it's time for you to pack up and go, and I have a place that I want you to go. And just in case Elijah might not step into that obedience like he could possibly choose to do, God makes sure that he has to because he dries up the brook. Isn't that weird? Like he tells you to go, and he's going to make sure that you're going to have to at least move somewhere from the place that you're at. So that's where, at this time period, Elijah is getting to go from the brook into a neighboring town. And so, let me see. So the brook dries up. The Lord tells him to go. And then this part is really awesome because he says, I have directed, one version says commanded, a widow there to supply you with food. So he went to this town, and when he came to the town gate, there was indeed a woman. She was gathering sticks. He called out to her, and he asked her, would you bring me a little water in a jar so that I may have a drink? I'm thinking, really? You want her to stop what she's doing to accommodate you? But this is the weird part. She suddenly just drops what she's doing to go and get his water. As she's walking off, he calls to her and says, bring me a piece of bread. Okay, so the weird part to this is that obviously she's busy, and I can't help but think as a woman's standpoint, she's got to look at him and say, really? Do you see that I'm in the middle of something and that I've had a full day of work and I still have another full day of work after this, and you want me to stop what I'm doing for you a glass of water and some bread? All right, so I love that she just all of a sudden obliges. She goes and she goes to get him some water, but she stops and she lets him know about a circumstance. She tells him as she's going to get him his water and his bread, as surely as the Lord your God lives, she replied, I don't have any bread. Only a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. I'm gathering sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son that we may eat it and die. So, kind of weird here that God has commanded Elijah to go and to do something. God knew what he was doing when he told Elijah where to go. It was no accident that Elijah is supposed to go and find this widow. But do you think that Elijah at some point would have thought it weird that he's going to ask this woman who has nothing to provide him with bread? And so I start thinking on, did he feel uncomfortable? What were her thoughts? And then I go back to the word commanded. You see, obviously, she must have been a woman who had a relationship with God, because when he commanded her, she was already expecting Elijah to come to her and ask her for something. She had a relationship that was open. She didn't think twice when he said, go get me some water. And then when he added, go get me some bread, she was just going to go and do it. She did let him know, I don't have anything. I have nothing to give you except for this. So I find it weird that Elijah is asking her for these things, and I can't help but wonder, as a guy going to a woman to ask for this, did he feel uncomfortable? Did he feel like maybe I got this one wrong and maybe I was supposed to ask somebody else who had more to give than this woman? But that is what is so amazing about this story, is that she had nothing, yet she didn't think twice about what she was about to do. She was ready when he asked to just go and give. So I think of my own self and I think about, am I that willing to just give when I'm asked? Do I play it through and think of all the what ifs before I say, okay? Do I think, this is my last bit of stuff here, I probably shouldn't give it away? And so I love that this ordinary woman, the widow, who they didn't even take time to give her a name, she's just wearing her label. She didn't think twice about it. She was just ready to do what God asked of her. So Elijah said to her, "Don't be afraid. Go home and do as you have said. But first, make a small loaf of bread for me from what you have and bring it to me. And then make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry." So Elijah tells her, but first, go and make me something. But first, serve me. And then, with whatever is left, feed yourself. And I can't help but think, is that a casual conversation? Is he casual about it? Or since he's got such an amazing relationship with God, does he know already that God is in the middle of this and that God is ready to move and God is ready to provide for this widow in a way that no one else can foresee? So he tells her, but first, make me a loaf of bread and then take care of you and your son. And I wonder, as the widow is thinking, I just told you what my circumstance is. I just told you that I'm preparing to make my last meal and die. She's in a circumstance, right, where she sounds as if she's given up in a huge way. Like I said before, I'm pretty sure she had a really great connection to God because she heard him as she was directed to provide for Elijah when he got there. Yet at the same time, she's an ordinary woman. She's somebody who knows that she has a need and knows that she obviously doesn't have something. But there she is, ready to meet Elijah at his need and put her need behind her. I think that is such a huge testimony of who this woman is, just an ordinary woman, ordinary like you and I. You are in a circumstance, just like I'm in a circumstance, where it looks like there is no hope. It looks like there's nothing that you could possibly do or give to somebody else. Yet sometimes God steps in and he asks for you to give. He asks for you to do what doesn't seem possible. See, I started to really think this story through, and I don't think that God sent Elijah to the widow so that the widow would feed Elijah. Because God already showed us that in his weird way, he would provide for Elijah when the need was there. I think that God sent Elijah to the widow for the widow. Because in her circumstance where she had already given up and decided she was just going to go ahead and prepare her last meal with whatever it was that she had, she put herself second and she gives to somebody else. In that moment, God meets her in that ordinary circumstance with his extraordinary love so that he can show who he is, not just to Elijah and not even just to the widow, but to all of the people in this town who knew this widow and knew that she had nothing and knew that there was no possible way for her to provide for anybody, much less some stranger from another town. And so when this provision is met, and it says, the jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry, when this provision is made evident, everybody can see there's only one possible way that this has been made possible. And that's what our God does. He loves us so much. He meets us in that ordinary circumstance to show what is impossible. And He makes the way, and He makes it possible. So I love this story and how this woman who didn't know what to expect just put herself second. Sometimes I think that God shows up in ways for us to take our eyes off of our own circumstance and put them somewhere else. This past week, whenever we were having these really crazy storms, I'm really crazy about stuff. Like, I was working at First Monday, and I saw those big gray clouds rolling in, and I was like, oh my gosh, I need somebody to build me a storm shelter right now, because this is fixing to be serious. I was watching the news on my phone. People were coming up while I'm at First Monday, and I'm telling them, you need to go home. I don't know what you're doing here, but you need to be leaving so that I can leave, because there's fixing to be a storm here. And so I'm watching, and I'm freaking out, and I'm sure I started freaking everybody else out. So I finally get to leave First Monday, and I go home, and I rush, and I get my babies, and I am pretty crazy. And so my kids are playing, and while they're playing, I get the little baby bed mattress out for my son's bed, because that's there just in case I might need it one day. And so I pull that out from his bed, and in his closet I've got pillows and I've got snacks, because those are already kind of packed just in case you might need them in case of a storm, since I don't have a storm shelter. And so I'm pulling all these things out, the pillows, and of course my kids, they don't see what I'm doing, but that's okay. And so I get their snacks and the drinks, and I've got iPads and whatever ready for them to watch videos, as if in a storm you're going to be able to watch a video. Anyways, we were ready for a little cushy date in the closet, and I'm freaking out, and I keep going outside, and I look, and the clouds are gray, and the wind is blowing, and oh my gosh, it's just going to look like Dorothy, and it's going to pick up a house, and it's going to take it somewhere else, and my thoughts are insane by this point. My kids are building with blocks, one's coloring, and I'm like, oh my gosh, they don't even know what's going on. But that's because I was sheltering them from what was really going on. I mean, I didn't drag the mattress in front of them. I waited till they were in the other room. So they didn't know my preparation. And just as they didn't know my preparation, God stepped into my, what didn't feel like a very ordinary situation, but He stepped in and He said, what are you doing? Why are you taking this whole afternoon for preparation when your kids are over there waiting for you to play with them? All this while, I'm bringing out all of these things to be prepared for something that might or might not happen while they're living life in the moment, in this ordinary circumstance. And so, as I went and sat there and watched them, I did ask myself, what am I doing? Why am I trusting what the Weather Channel has told me versus who I know He is? So I started to pray, started to let the crazy go, just a little, not a lot, just a little. And I went in there and I sat on the floor with my kids, and I started to build a tower that Gavin liked to knock over. And I started to color with Gracie as he was breaking crayons. And that sounds chaotic, but it's our normal. And it's okay. Because then I forgot about the storm that was going crazy outside, and I was in the moment. And then before I realized it, I thought, I better go and check to see if we need to do anything else. And when I went outside, there was no more storm. The wind had already died down. It barely even rained at my house that day. And so there I was. When I was listening to my own self, I was getting all kinds of crazy, letting all of these things dictate this moment. But first, if I go to Him and I say, God, step into this for me, then He does. And then He takes care of everything else around it. That story, taking my eye off of the storm worrying about something that might or might not happen. But at the same time, it was for those two little kids who really needed me in their room at that moment. Investing in a moment that actually mattered, not worrying about all of the chaos that is outside of my circumstance. So whenever I start talking about but first, what do you think about? What does your circumstance look like? None of our stories are the same, therefore none of our circumstances are meant to be the same. But first you're going to have to take a look and you're going to have to decide, what is this thing that you're consumed with, that you're worried about, that you've got going on? There's an act of obedience that we have to step out into. I'm sure Elijah was thinking, what do you mean I have to go to a widow who has nothing and ask her for something? And then I think, what would have happened had Elijah not stepped out in his obedience? What would have happened to that widow had Elijah decided to do his own thing? What if he would have thought, my first, my thing, my situation is much more important than what you're telling me to do, God? What if he hadn't been in tune to God's voice, knowing those gentle whispers to know, what does it look like, God? What are you ready for me to do? What would have happened to the widow? Would her food supply, would she have made that last meal? Would her and her son have died because somebody didn't do their part? Of course, we can't get all wrapped up in the what ifs because God is greater than my what if. God is bigger than the chaos I experience. God is loving to the point that he is there and ready to step in when I ask him, please, I can't take this chaos anymore that goes on in my brain. He loves us that much. So each of us here has a circumstance that we have to say, but first, I have to step out in the obedience to God. Just like Elijah did, I have to be willing to step out into what might feel weird, what might not look normal. Matthew 6:33 says but first, seek the kingdom and his righteousness, and then all these things will be added. It's about putting others first. It's about doing his will first. It's about hearing from him to do what he asks of us. Are you coming to church all the time and you're ready for a connection? You're ready to step out of the old life and into what is new, but you don't know what to do? But first, ask him. But first, start serving. But first, put yourself out there to make a connection with somebody. But first, ask him, what is your place? And then these connections that feel unordinary, they start happening. These connections start to happen, and before you know it, you're connected to more people than just yourself. Is your marriage struggling to the point that you don't know what to do anymore? You've gone to all the marriage counselors and they're not able to tell you what to do anymore? You're at that place that it feels like the widow did when it feels like maybe it's time to just give up? But first, ask him. But first, seek him. But first, do your part. And then the abundance of his provision overflows. Are you at that place where life is too hard and the job just isn't making ends meet? And you've got a second job and it feels so overwhelming you can't even focus on what's happening in this ordinary circumstance. But first, ask him. But first, seek him. Do your part. I'm not in any way saying that any of your first steps are going to be easy. I do understand how hard it is. But I also have seen, just like the widow and everyone in that town, what happens when our extraordinary God is allowed to come into our ordinary places, and the love that he is ready to overflow on each and every one of us here today. It is no accident that each and every person is here today wanting a connection, wanting more, wanting to hear what his voice sounds like. And just like what happened in the story with Elijah and the widow, but first you have to be willing to do your part, and then somebody else is going to see who God is through you and through your obedience. And then they're going to be willing to take their first step. And then together, everybody starts to do their part. Then people suddenly around you start to see who God is through your circumstance, because you have allowed that God to just come in and take over. You no longer decide what your next step is, because you are seeking Him first, asking, what is my next step through you? It is a beautiful thing, and I'm so excited for everybody here to start asking, what's first, God? What's this small step that I might need to take to walk in your obedience, to experience your love, to experience your truth that becomes so evident to the people around me that your love can't be contained, but the only thing I can do from here is to share it. If you will, just stand up with me so that I can pray for us.